Millions of half-moon shapes are excavated by Africans under the intense Sahara sun. Why utilize such geometry in a billion-dollar project? It seems counterintuitive to rely on hand tools. These depressions capture rainfall, turning millions of acres of dry soil into fertile ground. At first glance, the holes appear insignificant, but in reality, they form the basis of the Great Green Wall. But this is just the beginning. One can notice how the barren crust transforms into green zones capable of sustaining life. This stands as one of the largest land restoration initiatives on the planet. The project aims to halt the advance of desertification. The landscape begins to regain its vitality. 9.2 million square kilometers cover an area nearly the size of the United States, constituting almost one-third of the African continent. This constitutes the massive footprint of the Sahara Desert. But this geological giant is not static. Since the early 20th century, its territory has expanded by roughly 10 to nearly 20%. And alarmingly, the process continues to accelerate year after year. Why does this expansion pose such a critical threat to the semi-arid belt known as the Sahel to the south? Hundreds of millions of people across more than 20 African countries live in this zone and depend directly on the soil for survival. It would seem that the primary enemy is a complete lack of rainfall, but the Sahel actually experiences intense, albeit short, rainy seasons annually. The answer lies in the physical state of the ground itself. The soil surface has hardened over time, forming a dense water-repellent crust. One can notice how heavy rainwater hits this barrier and immediately runs off across the terrain instead of soaking into the depths. Because the water cannot penetrate, it creates flash floods before vanishing, leaving the earth dry beneath the surface. This triggers a dangerous physical cycle. Prolonged drought degrades the soil structure, while heavy rains subsequently cause mechanical erosion, forcing the land to lose its retention capabilities. Desertification, therefore, is not merely a climate anomaly, but the total collapse of the water-soil system. But this is just the beginning of the challenge. In response, the African Union launched the Great Green Wall Initiative in 2007. The project stretches approximately 8,000 kilometers from the Atlantic coast in the west to the Red Sea in the east. Why is the project's name technically misleading? At first glance, one might imagine a continuous barrier of trees, but in reality, the initiative creates a mosaic network of ecosystem restoration. Each of the 20 participating nations applies specific technical solutions based on local soil analysis, water availability, and livelihoods. The goal is not to force vegetation to grow, but to mechanically reshape how water, land, and people interact, allowing life to return naturally. For decades, engineers and agencies viewed simple tree planting as the obvious standard countermeasure against the sand. Billions of saplings were inserted into the ground, backed by billions of dollars in international aid. However, statistics show that more than 80 to 90% of these biological units died after just 1 or 2 seasonal cycles. It gets more complex further on. These failures occurred not due to a lack of effort, but because the restoration attempts started at the incorrect stage of the physical process. Young trees were introduced into soil that had already lost its porous structure and was nearly devoid of essential living microorganisms. One can observe how water flow velocity was too high for absorption during rains. When the sun returned, surface temperatures spiked and residual moisture evaporated into the atmosphere within mere hours. Planting on such dead substrates is physically equivalent to installing a complex machine on a collapsed foundation. The land must regain its basic ability to sustain life before vegetation can hold. Digging into the earth becomes the priority over planting saplings. Why focus on water mechanics rather than simply adding trees? At first glance, afforestation seems obvious, but without improving soil functions, the land remains degraded. The process is only gaining momentum. One can notice how local techniques physically slow runoff to reduce erosion across the Sahel. At the core lies one crucial method: digging half-moon pits to capture rainwater. This revives the soil structure for future growth. Short, violent bursts of rain define the climate in the Sahel, where water does not fall gently but rushes downslope at high speed. Why was the half-moon pit specifically chosen over a standard straight trench? A straight line would simply channel this rapid runoff away, effectively losing the precious resource to the surrounding terrain. But the curved, open-ended shape intercepts the flow from multiple angles. forcing the water to slow, spread, and settle into the parched earth. This crescent form naturally reduces velocity without trapping the liquid completely, allowing for gradual infiltration instead of overflow. This design works with gravity and terrain rather than against them, which is why the half-moon pit succeeds where other structures fail. The way half-moon pits are dug in Africa is not random, but follows a clear and deliberate technical process. First, contour lines on the slope are identified using ropes, stakes, and simple hand tools. This ensures that the pits are positioned perpendicular to the direction of runoff during heavy rain. Each pit creates a crescent shape with its open side facing uphill to catch incoming water, while the back sits on the lower side to hold it in place. A typical pit measures about 4 to 6 meters in diameter and only 20 to 40 centimeters deep, with an outer earth bund rising 25 to 50 centimeters high. At first glance, the pits seem too shallow to be effective, but in reality, the goal is not to store water like a pond, but to slow runoff long enough for it to infiltrate the soil. One can notice how the earth bunds form a physical barrier against the rushing water. But this is just the beginning of the restoration process. Roughly 8 to 15 meters separate the structures, aligned in parallel rows along the contour to form a stepped hydraulic system. The entire process requires only hose, shovels, and manual labor, making the method low-cost and highly scalable. On average, one person can complete a single pit in about an hour of steady work. After the pits are dug, farmers spread seeds of native grasses such as andropogon or centros inside the hollows. These grasses are highly drought-resistant and develop deep fibrous root systems that help stabilize the soil and improve infiltration. Once established, they trap organic matter and moisture, creating the first living layer that allows the soil to recover. One can notice how the texture of the ground changes as roots bind the loose earth. It gets more complex further on as the ecosystem responds. In practice, the impact of half-moon pits becomes clearly visible after 2 to 5 years. What initially starts as scattered patches of grass gradually expands into continuous ground cover, with vegetation density increasing season after season. Studies in field results in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Senegal show that restored areas can reach 40 to 60% vegetation cover compared to near zero before intervention. More importantly, this is not just grass returning, as improved soil moisture and structure allow shrubs and native trees to regenerate naturally. One can notice how isolated green patches turn into functioning ecosystems rather than temporary vegetation islands. Over time, insects, small animals, and grazing systems return to the area, reconnecting previously fragmented habitats. And this is not the limit of the system's potential. Beyond ecological recovery, the half-moon pit approach also creates essential livelihoods for local populations. As soil fertility improves, many communities are able to grow crops such as millet and maize again. Field projects in Niger and Burkina Faso show that restored land can increase yields by 50 to 100% while bringing thousands of hectares back into production. This directly translates into food security, household income, and seasonal employment through digging, maintenance, and harvesting. Tree planting is a direct intervention, while half-moon pits act as a system trigger that delivers fast, durable, and scalable results. The system-based approach continues to function, sustaining the land for future cycles. Millions of liters of vital moisture remain hidden beneath the dry surface of riverbeds. Following half-moon pits, the sand dam method spreads widely across Africa. Engineers construct low walls of concrete or stone directly across seasonal river channels. One can notice how the barrier intercepts flash floods carrying massive amounts of sand. This sediment accumulates upstream of the wall, forming a dense layer. But this is just the beginning. Why do builders allow sand to fill the reservoir instead of keeping it open for clear water? At first glance, filling a dam with sediment seems counterintuitive, but in reality, this creates a natural underground shield. The sand protects the liquid from the scorching sun. This design avoids the 90% evaporation loss that typically drains open pits. One can observe water rising in shallow wells dug into the riverbed year-round. This supports drinking needs, small-scale irrigation, and livestock during long dry seasons. Kenya alone hosts more than 1,000 sand dams, with active projects in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. And this is not the limit. Field studies confirm that communities utilizing these structures can triple their local water availability. The technique significantly reduces soil erosion and increases agricultural output. Today, this stands as a scalable solution for dryland regions with seasonal rivers. The resource is ready for use without haste. 30 to 80%, exactly the increase in crop yields achieved by the technique known as the stone line. Also called stone buns or contour stone lines, this method involves placing rows of loose stones along natural contour lines on gently sloping land to interrupt surface runoff. But this is just the beginning. Why pile simple rocks on the ground in such a specific arrangement? At first glance, it seems like a primitive border, but in reality, it functions as a precise hydraulic filter. During heavy seasonal rains, the stone lines drastically slow down the flowing water, allowing sediments and organic matter to settle instead of being washed away. One can notice how the muddy current loses speed upon impact with the barrier. Fine soil accumulates behind the stones, gradually rebuilding fertile topsoil where crops and grasses can finally take root. The structure increases water infiltration, effectively recharging soil moisture levels without blocking the flow completely. It gets more complex further on. Because of these benefits, the technique has been widely applied in Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and Ethiopia. Consequently, field results show massive improvements, especially for staples like millet and sorghum in areas with degraded soils. Using only local stone and manual labor, the lines remain durable, low cost, and easy to maintain. They serve as a long-term backbone for dryland restoration, often remaining effective for decades. The system continues to function autonomously, preserving the soil for future planting. 35 million hectares of new forest is the ultimate target of the Green Great Wall Initiative. For centuries, northern China has battled an invisible enemy in the form of relentless sand. Monsoon winds sweep down from the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts, creating massive dust storms that blanket the skies over Beijing. By the 1990s, residents in the capital were forced to wear masks for more than 80 days a year to avoid breathing fine dust. But this is just the beginning. Why is the region so catastrophically dry? The Taklamakan Desert formed millions of years ago when the Tian Shan Mountains to the north and the Kunlun Mountains to the south blocked nearly all moisture. These ranges stop wet air from the Indian Ocean and Siberia. Consequently, the basin turned into a vast, arid wasteland. One can notice that average rainfall here is less than 100 millimeters per year. This figure is almost 10 times lower than in the dry heat of California. To put that in perspective, every square meter of land receives only the same amount of water as a 500 milliliter bottle per week. Such conditions make it impossible for ordinary plants to survive without help. It gets more complex further on. In 1978, the government launched the 3 North Shelter Belt program to reverse this trend. This network of thousands of forests and windbreak belts stretches more than 4,500 kilometers. It spans from the Xinjiang Autonomous Region all the way to Heilongjiang Province, covering nearly the entire northern part of China. The project aims to increase forest coverage from just 10% in 1949 to over 25% today. It is considered the largest human-made project ever built on land. At first glance, the solution seems to rely solely on planting trees, but in reality it begins with a complex engineering operation involving straw. Engineers survey the terrain using satellite mapping and drones to analyze dune movement. Based on those data, they design a massive grid system. Straw checkerboards lay diagonally across the sand in squares measuring about 20 by 20 feet. From above, the land looks like a gigantic geometric board of golden squares stretching all the way to the horizon. Millions of pounds of straw are transported hundreds of miles into the heart of the desert. One can see how vehicles often sink into soft sand where paved roads simply do not exist. Everything only gets more complicated. Teams of workers dig shallow trenches and place bundles of straw into precise grid lines. They work through the relentless sun with temperatures rising above 49 degrees Celsius and no shade in sight. Every movement feels like a battle against heat and exhaustion. Yet this woven pattern stabilizes the shifting dunes and slows the wind. It creates microzones where moisture can linger long enough for planting to begin. Transition to the next level. Mechanical augers and planting machines move in to drill small holes at the center of each square. This prepares the soil for drought-resistant species such as saxaul, desert poplar, and red willow. Seedlings nurtured in nurseries are transplanted into each hole with precision. Because the roots must settle just below the surface, the straw layer shields them from the scorching sun and shifting sand. Workers add a measured amount of water and compact the soil around the base to ensure full contact with the moist layer. As weeks go by, the straw keeps the surface cooler and reduces evaporation. And this is not the limit. The straw gradually decomposes through wind and microorganisms, turning into an organic blanket rich in nutrients. This natural fertilizer feeds the developing root systems, helping them extend deeper into the stable soil layers below. Thus, a living green framework anchors the dunes, reclaiming the desert. Two vast regions demonstrate how to fight desertification. Why are African and Chinese methods combined? The sand advances relentlessly. These barriers effectively stop it. At first glance, the solution seems simple, but in reality, one can notice the complex stabilization of the soil. The work of land recovery continues.